yesterday at the NovaCare Center. Our John McMullen was there and has some more as the Eagles win handily, John. They won handily yesterday, and just kind of set the scene in that locker room after that game yesterday. You know, they win that game going away. Was there a wow, like surprise feeling, or was there a very business-like, hey, we expected this kind of result?
No, it's funny you use that term because when Doug was walking back to the locker room, he visibly said, wow, twice. I don't think anyone was expecting that kind of emphatic win against that kind of competition. And they destroyed them. They dominated them on both sides of the football. And it's time to start recalibrating expectations around here because at the bare minimum, this football team's a lot better than we all expected them to be.
All right, you just said it's time to recalibrate the expectations. So, after a win like yesterday, what are reasonable expectations if we're resetting them?
Well, reasonable expectations are at this point is you're going to be in the NFC East race, and there's no reason to think you can't win this division considering the competition. It's as simple as that. There are no great teams in this particular division, so we kind of talked about it last Tuesday when we were all together and say, why not the Eagles? And it's just more in that direction. Why not the Eagles? Right now, they're the best team in that division. They certainly have the best defense in that division. And if the quarterback continues to play the way he does, obviously you're going to be not only a contender, a significant contender. Now, while I say that, you can't – I mean, the guy hasn't thrown an interception. That can't continue, obviously. Doesn't matter what name you want to throw out there. Everybody has bad games. Everybody has clunkers. It's going to come sooner or later for Carson Wentz. But what you do know is he's a franchise quarterback. And when I use that term, doesn't mean he's a superstar at this point. It means he's going to be the guy for your franchise for the next decade or so, barring injuries. He's that type of prospect.
Yeah, no, he does. He is, and you can hear that from his teammates. I mean, Brent Selleck said, he's infectious. He's making the game fun. I'm a 10-year veteran. And, it seems that he has spread throughout that locker room on both sides of the ball.
Yeah, I mean, these guys believe in him. And Doug kind of said, at first the veteran players were a little wary when they made the trade because as veterans, the assumption is, and we kind of said, when you look at the Chicago beat writers, who all picked the Bears to beat the Eagles. When you look at all the Steelers beat writers who all picked Pittsburgh to beat the Eagles, they were all going on the same assumption, and it's not a wrong assumption. A rookie quarterback generally in this league is going to struggle, and he's going to struggle mightily. That's what they were going on, but they don't get to see this kid every day. He's not your average rookie quarterback. Obviously, he's not struggling. He's doing the exact opposite. And the veteran players were in that camp saying, oh, God, we have a rookie quarterback. We're going to struggle. And it's just not been the case, even though that was the expectation.
Hey, John, you right at the beginning of your quick hits from yesterday's game. At what point do we tap out and admit that Carson Wentz is for real? So is this you saying that you've seen enough, that you think this guy has the staying power? Hey, we've all in Philly, we've seen the Cobbs, we've seen the Hoyings, we've seen the Foles, even a Foles who put out a full season of success.
Yeah, I mean, I knew it before the Pittsburgh game, but I was kind of, and it has nothing to do with stats because you bring up Nick Foles, and it's very unlikely Carson Wentz will ever have a statistical season similar to what Nick Foles had with the 27-2 year, because that doesn't happen that often. But it's got to do more with the intangibles. It's got to do more with the stuff he does at the line of scrimmage for such a young player. That's the kind of stuff I lean on and say, well, this is the real deal. This is a franchise quarterback. And now that you kind of take out of the equation, and it was fair to point out, look, Cleveland stinks, Chicago stinks. There's no question about that. Those might be the two worst teams in the entire NFL. But yesterday, you got to see one of the best teams in the NFL, and it got even better because they destroyed the Steelers. And again, it's not only the quarterback, it's also the defense and things of that nature. But you should know at this point, if you're an Eagles fan, and I always kind of laugh at Philadelphia fans because they always joke they don't believe they can have nice things. Well, you have a nice thing. You have a franchise quarterback. The Eagles hit a home run here. And barring injury, there's no doubt in my mind he's going to be a star quarterback in this league.
And one of the things that helped them, John, to me, was the way they were able to run the football yesterday as well. They didn't abandon the running game. In fact, Wendell Smallwood and Kenyon Barner both added to that running game. Were you surprised that when Matthews went out, they didn't miss a beat?
Well, at that point, it was sort of like I thought Wendell looked good, and I think it was a positive development. At that point of the game, though, it was sort of like the snowball going down the hill. The Eagles already had control. It's just human nature from the opponent. When you see everything going the other direction, it just tends to get worse and worse. So while it certainly was a positive development, and you could see some of the juice that Smallwood has with the young legs and things of that nature, I wouldn't get hung up on the fact that, these guys are going to be significant. The Eagles still want to get Ryan Matthews right. And Doug kind of said that today. When he's healthy, he's going to be the main back in this rotation. And that's not going to change despite the fact that Wendell and Kenyon Barner performed pretty well yesterday.
How about the wideouts? Jordan Matthews catches a touchdown yesterday. It looks like they got back on the right page. Your impressions of the wideouts in the football game?
There are some good and some bad. Jordan, I think, had a really, really bad game blocking, and I think that was obviously in the game plan. The Eagles wanted to get Josh Huff more involved, get him the ball in space, and they did get him the ball a number of times. And the blocking from the other wide receivers on those bubble screens or things of that nature on the edge was not good. In fact, it was the exact opposite. It was really, really bad. So it's one of those things where you didn't see the egregious drops, but there were some other things that sort of hold Jordan back from being the player that he wants to be, the player that some people think he already is. And that's one of those things. If you want to be a really, really good star receiver in this league, that kind of stuff, the blocking, that's got to be part of it. And it's not like you have to be Riley Cooper as Chip, but you got to get in front of your defensive back on a bubble screen, and he consistently failed time and time again yesterday.
John McMullen, 97.3 ESPN.com is with us. How about, the last couple of years, one of the narratives was that the Chip Kelly teams would be in better shape, that they would be, in the second half of games would be in much better shape than other teams because of the quick-paced offense and wear them down. But it seems like this team here is in physical control as these games get, deeper into the games, that they're winning the battle physically at the line of scrimmage, and they seem like the fresher team late in these games.
Well, yeah, that's a fundamental disagreement a lot of people have with Chip Kelly. You could have the best conditioning in the world, but if you're getting beat up for 85 plays on defense, it's not going to help you. And yesterday, the Eagles were on the field for 60 plays, and that was a season high. It was 52 in the first 2 weeks. So they continue to do a very good job with time of possession. Continue to troll the game as far as tempo goes on both sides of the football. And I think that's why they look like a better conditioned team. I'm not sure they're in better shape, or if they want to run a marathon, maybe Chip had the advantage there. But to win football games, this coaching staff has the right sort of way of doing things, and they have their philosophy is better for the long term, especially at the pro level. Because one of the things I always pointed out with Chip is that's fine for the college level when you have 90-man rosters, sometimes more at big-time colleges for home games, and they're all 18, 19, 20-year-old kids who can run for days. When you have players like Jason Peters coming to the end of his career and the roster is only 53, 46 on game day, common sense says you can't run things the same way you did it in college. But for whatever reason, Chip could never figure that out.
Hey, John, I want to flip over to defense. Jim Schwartz, I mean, he has an you talk about Wentz and it's infectious. You know, the way that he reacts on the sideline when they made some plays late in that game. It's 34-3, and he's pumping his fist. It seems that, they found the right guy to lead that defense.
Yeah, I mean, we've talked about that since the day they hired Jim. I said it that day, and I've continued to say it. This is one of the 5 best defensive coordinators in football, and the Eagles got him, and that's why they have this good plan week after week after week. Now, I think it's going to be interesting still when they get a team that can hold up in pass blocking, because to this point, the Eagles have been able to get pressure consistently with four rushes, and that's what Jim wants to do. And you can sort of hide some of the deficiencies you have at corner, and I think those do exist. When you get to a good pass blocking team, things might change, and the Eagles might start struggling a bit defensively. But Jim will do something else. I mean, he'll figure it out. He's just a really, really good defensive coordinator. And you're not going to see this defense fall off a table like you've seen in years past, because he will adjust. He will do different things to try to throw a monkey wrench into the opposing offense, even if things are going poorly, and they will at some point. But over a 16-game, he always does.
Yeah, and one of the questions was today about giving him full autonomy on the defense, that that Doug basically says, I don't do any time. I don't do any time game planning with him. You just show up on Sunday, call whatever you want. You don't see that often in the NFL.
Well, yeah, I mean, you do, actually. I for some reason, I don't know. There's this narrative that people want to attack Doug because I don't know. I really don't get it. And I think that was another example of, I mean, if you're an offensive head coach in this league, and you're a smart offensive head coach, you hire a good defensive coordinator and let him do his job. Vice versa. If you're a good defensive coach, you hire an offensive coordinator and you let him do your job. At times, if it's a really, really important situation, 2 minutes left in the game, there's a big play call on either side of the ball, you might want to get involved. You might want to say, I want to do this. But the good head coaches delegate. And Andy Reid didn't tell Jim Johnson what to do on the defensive side of the ball. That would be silly. And the same is true as Doug Pederson. If he's trying to tell Jim Schwartz what to do, you're doing a bad job. And if you look at maybe the 2 best defensive head coaches in this league are obviously Bill Belichick would be one, and then what you see Mike Zimmer doing out in Minnesota, and they both have offensive coordinators, and they let them do what they do. That's just the nature of this industry.
John, did you think the secondary took a step forward yesterday and improved?
Well, I think certain guys did. Malcolm Jenkins played his best game of the year, and Nolan Carroll by far his best game of the year. And I thought Ron Brooks was pretty steady. Jalen struggled again, as rookies tend to do. He had a lot of volume, but it didn't mean much from Antonio Brown. I mean, the numbers were there, but I compared it to an NBA player scoring 40 points in a game they lose by 30. It didn't mean anything. And he did a lot of his damage against Jalen Mills, but that's to be expected. Overall, again, they did a very, very good job. And the fact that they held an offense a lot of people think is the best in all of football out of the end zone for the entire afternoon.
And I know you've been high on Brandon Graham, but it looks like the rest of the league is noticing as well. Pittsburgh made some adjustments to account for him.
Yeah, they did. They were chipping him a lot in the pass rush. They were sending a running back or a tight end to make sure they gave the tackle some extra help before they went out in their route. And he's starting to get that respect. And he's been a late bloomer because, let's face it, this guy was 13th overall pick in the draft, 2 spots ahead of Jason Pierre-Paul. And if you look at what that narrative was a number of years ago, what a big mistake the Eagles made at that particular time. And here we are in 2016, and if you look at those 2 particular players, one is obviously better than the other, and it's not Jason Pierre-Paul, it's Brandon Graham, who's been one of the best edge defenders in the NFL this year. And he's a very well-rounded guy. He's not only a good pass rusher, he also sets the edge in the run game. And now all of a sudden you got 2 players on that defensive line with Brandon and Fletcher Cox who are playing at a Pro Bowl level, and that's pretty good.
Yeah. Although, go back to Pete's question about the secondary, they had 12 pass breakups yesterday, and I remember, going back to training camp, you saying that McKelvin's their best guy, and he hasn't been a factor at all.
Yeah, and that's positive. And as I said, but Nolan was lights out. And that was a very positive development. He locked down one side of the field. You don't generally think of him as a lockdown corner, and he's not. He just had a great afternoon, but it was such a positive development because he had played very, very poorly through the first 2 games. So to see him get back going in the right direction, play a game like that was very positive. Same thing with Malcolm, who had not played all that well in the first 2 games, and all of a sudden against Pittsburgh, he looked like the Malcolm Jenkins of last season. So those were the 2 guys that you looked at and said they had tremendous games, and they did.
Also, Ertz, you look at, he'll be back next week too. I mean, just adds another layer to the offense. I'm really intrigued because, to me, Ertz is, for Wentz's style of play and his skill set and what he does well, Ertz to me is the most valuable weapon on the offense.
Yeah, well, I think he's the best receiver on this team. Obviously, when you consider hands and things of that nature, I think overall he's the best receiver on this team. So anytime you lose a player of that talent, of that caliber, it's never good. And they persevered without him for 2 games. They hope he's back. I don't want to say he's definitely going to be back after the bye because that was such a serious injury as far as the placement and as far as where it was things that could have gone wrong. And they certainly hope he's going to be back. I think they expect he's going to be back. But we'll wait and see as we get back toward practice next week. Whenever he returns, though, it's a big deal for him. Trey Burton played very well against Chicago. Not as well, obviously. And that's what you have with young players, inconsistency. And the drops, really, they showed themselves again, and one of the main culprits was Trey Burton.
Hey, you wrote the piece at 973ESPN.com. He threw a Manning reference out there today. Not Eli, Peyton.
Yeah, and I didn't like that. It's very
well, if you just read the headline, it sounds like he's comparing him to Peyton Manning, but he compared him to Manning in a off-the-field reference.
Yeah. And he put the context on it, and I agree with that. But you know how people are. And all of a sudden, I just don't think as a head coach, and I don't think Doug has done much wrong to this point. I just don't think you want to add that label on top of all the pressure on the kid already. He's shown a tremendous ability to ignore it all. But I just don't think you should risk it with the hyperbole and never bring up Nate. Leave that to us. We're the goofballs.
Well, he did compare him mentally to Alex Smith. Same has the vivid memory, stuff like that.
And during the game on the Sproles touchdown, I said, that's Brett Favre. I just saw Brett Favre reincarnated because that's what Brett would do. Just extend the play, keep his eyes downfield, make that little flip throw over the defender. But I said, leave that to us.
Your hyperbole, okay. Doug Pederson's hyperbole, no good.
Well, yeah, because it doesn't matter if people start, and many people did,
right,
start taking shots at me. But it's just not, for a head coach to do it, it just doesn't make a lot of sense because that's gonna stick a lot more than if I or another writer says it, number one. And number two, you're just creating hurdles that don't need to be there.
John will be with us tomorrow. We will recap more of this game and all of the Week 3 football action, which closes out tonight with the Falcons and the Saints. John, take care, pal.
Hey, thank you, guys.